abroad, I had looked for isolated dwellings with Airbnb and every other way that I had to look for that, but I couldn't find any because isolated houses are normally big houses, the ones with pool. So if you're a single lady like I am, it's very hard to live alone.
Welcome to the Crossing It Off podcast, the internet's #1 bucket list show, where we believe your bucket list can be more than a social media brag, but bring you deep joy in your life. Each week we share the stories of people just like you that are living out their bucket/life goal list. I am your host, Roger Williams, and through hearing our guests' adventures, my goal is that you will find inspiration and empowerment to add and cross items off of your list. When you find something here that motivates you, we ask that you share this episode with one other person and rate and review the show. Let's get to crossing it off. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Crossing It Off podcast. I'm excited for our guest today. She describes herself as a researcher, a podcaster, an author, and a globetrotter. I'm excited to have her here, Federica Bressan.
Bressan. But it's okay.
I can't do it. I can't do it. Spent 2 months in Italy, and I can't do it. And several months in Spain, I still can't roll my R's like that. But thank you, Federica. So tell us, what is the thing that you crossed off your list?
To live in the woods.
Okay, to live in the woods. That seems like a really simple answer, but is probably a lot more complicated than one would think. Where were you living before you moved to the woods, and why the woods?
Well, New York City.
Okay, nice. So that's a big change between the two. Why? What motivated you to say, I'm going to go live out in the woods?
Well, it's something that I had started feeling that I wanted, like, over the years, really. I was looking for peace and quiet and calm and, of course, nature, but there was something about also isolation. So the woods are just a place where you normally live isolated, but I could have answered like to live in isolation. So to withdraw somehow, to get out of this hectic daily routine. And guess what? This wish came true in part thanks to COVID.
Okay.
So, yeah.
We're not talking about you going out to the woods and chopping down trees and building a log cabin, right? I mean, you went someplace that already had, electrical outlets and toilets.
Almost. I did cut some trees, but not to build my dwelling. But how it went is that, it's not even that original a wish. Many people say, I just want to, drop everything and go live in the mountains. So it's not that unheard of a wish. But you would think that someone is like a top manager in a company and they get fed up with everything, they quit and they go and live in the woods. So it's almost in one step, and it's not easy, but you can imagine how it happens. You take decisions, you arrange your exit strategy, and you go. How it happened to me is that, like I said, it grew in me over the years, and then I realized that how I ended up in the woods was the result of years of choices. It wasn't one step. For example, I knew I wanted isolation, peace, and quiet. And I was always looking for quiet apartments, quiet places. And even in the Upper East Side in Manhattan, when I was living there, I was having the time of my life. Of course, you hear some traffic outside, but it was quiet inside. So it was close to my dream, my wish, minus nature,
right,
of course.
Exactly.
And what happened then is that with COVID, unfortunately, my contract was terminated in New York. I was shipped back to Europe. Luckily, COVID did not impact me health-wise or the health of my loved ones. But I have to say that way more than I initially had thought, COVID has changed the trajectory, the course of my life quite a bit. So long story short, it's a long story. I ended up settling down in central Italy. I'm Italian, but I wasn't born in this part of Italy, and I never wanted to go back to Italy. It wasn't on the map. for many reasons, I decided to come back to this country and look for a place in nature, quiet, because at that time I couldn't find any job for the life of me, mostly due to COVID then. And then I thought, you know what, this COVID isn't going away. This was mid 2020. And so I'm going to find some place out there in nature, just outside the cities, just very quiet, and hide from COVID. I'm going to read books, do my podcasts, do my things, but stop looking for a job because I couldn't find any for 6 to 8 months. And then I'm going to come back to society, basically civilization. And I settled down first in a small town in rural Italy here. This is the region of Rome. So I would be something shy of 2 hours drive from Rome, which is a good thing because you can live in nature, in isolation, and then still be in the capital in a short time. And I started to learn how things work around here. Normally, this is actually relevant. Abroad, I had looked for isolated dwellings with Airbnb and every other way that I had to look for that, but I couldn't find any because isolated houses are normally big houses, the ones with pool. So if you're a single lady like I am, it's very hard to live alone. And I started learning how things work around here. And I realized that, first of all, even houses for sale are incredibly cheap. And I started looking into that. And I started realizing that there are many homes that are run down just in the middle of the countryside. And they are not even for rent sometimes because they're too run down to rent. So people just own them. And another important factor here, this is all culture of this place, is that you don't have to ask Google. You have to ask the people. They will know. And so one day, after maybe a month and a half of being here in a sort of Airbnb in a small town, which is already far from New York, the experience from New York. I was in a small town. I picked up the phone and I called this man who worked in some office and had told me, if you need anything, call me. And I said, okay, I'll try. And I said, look, I had noisy neighbors, even in the small town, because that's the curse. You can be almost in isolation, but if you have neighbors, maybe you'll have noises. So I was desperately looking for silence, peace, and quiet, and nature, if possible. And I called him and I said, listen, do you know anyone who has a spare property? It can be run down. It can be whatever, as long as it's isolated. Like it has to be the wild boars, the snakes, and me. And if I have a stroke, I want to die there. Like nobody has to hear me scream. That tells you that I had the wish to live in nature and in the woods and in isolation, but that I was also a bit desperate to do it. I had had enough of noises and people, excuse me, somehow inside of us, we all have this wish sometimes just close the door and leave everybody outside, the entire world. In Brussels, I had a very quiet apartment right in the heart of the city. That was good enough for me, but I hadn't been so lucky then after that recently. So I was looking for this house, and this man replied and said, maybe I know someone for you. And within 2 hours' time, I was on the phone with a lady who owns a property in this same region, just around here, a few kilometers away. And that property would never be on Airbnb or any other website for rent or for sale. She just has that property. And she said, actually, I would be happy if you lived there because my parents lived there until they died. And now that house is basically empty. And, it's not good for the house. Someone needs to open the windows to keep it clean, to get it running. And we met and I thought, that's actually run down. Not everybody would choose to live there. It's substandard in many ways. But I just loved the fact that it had walls, a roof, nature all around, and nobody else for, at least hundreds of meters. Let's say I have neighbors, but the closest ones are a few hundred meters away. And the house is really hidden from the main road. If you don't know where it is, you don't find it. Google doesn't know the address. And even the postman, he took a while to learn the address. I missed a lot of mail. So I moved in there And this is how I ended up in that house in isolation. I don't know if this makes, I don't know what parts of the story may have struck you, but there are many things that are not easy to execute when you want to execute this plan. You need luck. You need to adjust to situations like there, for example. It's not a luxurious house. And if I had decided to make this wish come true, I don't know that I could have. It just happened at the right time, at the right place, with me wanting to do this for basically years and realizing that Airbnb after Airbnb, I was always looking for the quiet place, for the place in the small town, up until I found myself in a place where I could pick up the phone and ask someone, do you really know someone with a house that's isolated? And that's how I ended there. And now it's been this is the second summer that I spent there, because there's no heating. Among the many things that that house doesn't have, there is heating. So I moved to another place that is another story during the winter time. But as soon as the weather gets better, I just catapult myself there because I love it. I absolutely love it.
So you're a single woman and you decide to go out and, for some that could be pretty scary, right? Being out all by
Yes.
yourself, nothing else around. And that in itself might be a hindrance for someone to do it. You say it was substandard housing. Did you have to teach yourself some skills you didn't know as far as fixing up the home? Did you call people to help you do that? How did that work for you?
A little bit. I had help, which wasn't also the easiest to find, but I just feel that there's so much about the culture around here that I would have to explain. Here, it's not the norm to pick up the phone and look for a plumber or a construction worker from the yellow pages. Everybody knows someone here. There aren't many foreigners like me, so everybody was born here, so of course they know, and you're even perceived as who's she, like the foreign body here. So you want to trust your plumber, because if he doesn't know you, and it's always weird, it's really weird, it's good and bad. I don't mean to say bad things. I'm just saying it's a bit special. When you're here, you have to understand how things work, just like you would have to learn how things work in Manhattan if you came from, I don't know what other country or different place than a huge city. You would have to learn how things work there. And so I had some help, but I've always been handy in a way. So I did a couple of things around the house. I would say the funny, not funny thing is that during last year, every time I wanted to take a shower, I had to hammer the faucet in hope that water would come out, so that, because it didn't really work, but it wasn't really broken. And it's so old that you could not replace the piece because it's hard to find. Right. And to replace that piece, you would have to open up a piece of the wall. Right. And that's big work. So I just tried my luck. So it's a bit of inconvenience. I didn't have like a what do you call it? Refrigerator, just the fridge. So I couldn't eat ice cream last year, big sacrifices. But the main thing is indeed the animals. I had never seen, let alone being so close to, so many snakes and wild boars and bugs of all sorts and size and color and breed and nationality, like every sort of creature, and spiders. Of course, like you live in nature, and that's the kind of animals, of wildlife, of creatures you are going to get. You're not going to get kittens and butterflies. Well, the occasional butterfly.
Here at the Crossing It Off podcast, we are passionate about inspiring you in your bucket list lifestyle and empowering you to live out your list. We offer many resources to assist you in your bucket list journey, such as web resources in the show notes, bucket list mentoring services, my book Live Out Your Lists, a private Facebook group for you to share your bucket list success stories with others, and more. All of these can be found at crossingitoffpodcast.com. Find the resource that fits your need so that you can live out your list. Now back to the show.
But a badger A badger. I
Hmm.
adopted a badger. Adopted means I named him. I assume it's a him. It's called pompelmo, which in English means grapefruit.
Okay.
And so there was a badger. That's the those were my company, my friends.
So besides having to, do some work that learn some skills and do some work and adjust to maybe getting a shower, maybe not having a shower, and the animals, emotionally for you, what was the transition like going from the city of noise and movement to serenity out in the woods? What was the emotional process for you in that?
Right. Well, because I was looking for peace and quiet, I joked before, but I want to point out it's not that I like hate people. So it was fine being in the big city. It can be nice. But I was looking for, peace and quiet. So sometimes when I was still living in the big city, I would even maybe enjoy being in the crowd, but sort of alone with my thoughts. That was nice. But you may have experienced this when you are in such a quiet place where there are no noises, you go like, oh, you relax. You're like, oh, you breathe deeper, slower. So I was looking for that kind of, oh, that peace. And me, maybe I'm neurotic, I don't know, but I can only truly, truly relax if I know that not only there are no noises, but there can be no noises. If I have a
Mhm.
neighbor and anytime, or an upstairs neighbor, they can drop something, boom, anytime, and then it distract me from my meditation or my writing, my reading, whatever I'm doing. There in the woods, there is actually never silence because there are the noises of nature, the sounds of nature, but you know that nobody's going to slam a door. You know that nobody's going to just start shouting at someone else. And I just needed that. So the big difference was that indeed physically there were no people around. Yeah, this sounds awful.
No, no, no. I totally get it. I was just thinking, yes, I was lost in my thoughts about, yeah, even in my own home, I have a dog and I have a partner, and, there's always that little bit of tension if I'm focused on something that focus will be broken at any given time. And when I was, yeah, a few years ago, it was children and being in the house and all those kind of things. So I get it. I understand. If you met somebody that said, "Oh, I think I want to live out in the woods too," what would be like the one thing you would say, like, "Oh my gosh, you have to what?"
Just do it because nowadays it's super easy. Of course, depends. I don't know if you have the money to buy your own house, go ahead and do it. I'm the living proof that even if you don't have the money, you can still find some very old rundown place and move into it and stay there in exchange for paying the bills and keeping the house fresh and alive. But you know what is a game changer? The internet.
Mm,
You actually, with COVID, haven't you heard? Isn't it a thing that many people moved outside of the cities because they can work from home with internet? It's amazing. Like even there in the woods with the internet, I could be in touch with people just like you right now in Seattle. I'm in Italy. I would speak to people in every country in this world several times a day for work, for pleasure, my friends on WhatsApp. So
mhm.
is that isolation? Yeah, it's a conscious, deliberate, and selective isolation because if I don't want to speak to anyone, I'll just turn my phone off, my computer off. So it's easy to do. If someone wants to do it, I'll just say, if your current job allows for it, just pick a place and go. It's super easy.
So after you've done this now for a period of time, has there been a transformation inside of you that you've seen for yourself? And how's that transformation live out now that you're thinking about going back to the city or traveling more, that the situation's opened up a little bit? How have you changed in that process?
You know what? I have the answer to that, and I wish it sounded better. I realized that I have been happier.
Mm,
Out of question, I have been happier. What a bliss to live there. But the change has been as I developed this lifestyle and I expanded into this new way of living, I have become happier, definitely. But I realized that I became less tolerant, or that my threshold was lower in my tolerance for going back to hectic places.
Mm.
So you would imagine that when you're perfectly relaxed, you sleep well, like you're top, you're relaxed, it's easier to go back to the big city, even for a day, if you have errands to do or whatever reason, work, and because your battery's full, so to
Hmm.
speak. But no, I'm less tolerant. As soon as I see like chaos, I want to go back to my house in the middle of the woods. So to me, in general, it's been fantastic. I see this as a positive change because I've been so happy. But I realized that I'm less able to go back and live in. I just called it chaos, and I'm calling it chaos again. It's not just hectic lifestyle or city lifestyle. It's chaos,
Yeah,
really.
I spent 2 months traveling through Europe, mostly in Italy, and stayed in the center of most of the towns that I was in. And so I was walking. I didn't use a car. I didn't drive a car, for almost 2 months and 3 months. And the end of my trip, I spent a week in London. And the first thing that like popped into me was like, oh my gosh, there's so many cars. There's cars everywhere. What? And then I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going home back to the States and it's going to be just like this. There's just going to be cars everywhere. Not that there weren't cars in Italy, just didn't see as many. I didn't have a need to, everything I needed was close by. And so I get that. I understand that anxiety that can come from being someplace that's maybe slower lifestyle to this
Yeah.
hectic place.
Yeah, you know what? I don't know if I would use the word anxiety. It's more of a conscious rejection of that. It's like,
Hmm.
where are all these people running? Like, this is madness. You realize when you live at a slower pace, and I'm not saying anything new, that you do things better. You feel more, you do things better, you sleep better. Like, why live worse if you can live better? We are talking about quality of life. So, I mean, it can be a joke or just my small story that I went and lived in the woods because I could, you could say. But I think that it fits well in the bigger discourse of this movement that I don't like the name of, the quitters, people who are starting to realize that that it's pointless to just rush and produce and produce and produce, and they realize that the key assumption is that they can live with less, and so they quit or cut down and downsize their lives. I think that it's going to be one of the main biggest changes we're going to see in the next few decades in our society.
I agree with you full heartedly. I agree with you. So, Federica, what's the next thing on your list that you like to cross off?
Well, I'm just about to cross it off, actually, and that is to
Okay.
visit South America for the first time in my life.
And are you going to a specific place?
I am, because I'm not ubiquitous, although I wish I were. You know, I wish I could visit all of South America at the same
Yeah.
time, but I had to pick, and I picked Buenos Aires in Argentina.
What's the reason you picked that?
Because through a friend, I got an obsession for tango, tango mainly, but tango there. You know, they
Right.
dance tango here. It's so popular, of course,
Right.
worldwide.
Sure.
I just wanted to see a milonga there. I want to see how people talk about it there. I want to see
Mm.
them dance it the proper way. And then I play some accordion, and I wanted to try the bandoneon and play that, and just see the city. They say it's the most European city in South America,
Hmm.
the way it looks, the architecture. I just want to see that. I want to see new things.
That's so awesome. I greatly appreciate you being here and telling us your story. It's been a fantastic time talking to you. Where can people find you if they want more information about your journey or what you do? Where can they find you online?
I have a presence on social media, and I have different websites for my profile as a researcher, as a science communicator. My book. I just published my first novel, which I wrote. Guess where?
Nice.
Yeah.
Out in the woods.
So I would say either Google my name also because it's not easy to spell. I guess Federica Bressan. I'm sure there will be links in the description
Yes.
of this episode.
Federica, thank you so much for being here and telling your story. All the success as you travel to Argentina.
Thank you so very much and good luck with your podcast. It's so cool to hear about other people's bucket lists.